My name is Elena Whitman. I'm 32 years old, a plant communication researcher and founder of the Whitman Innovation Annex, though most people just call me the quiet girl who loved bees. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a family that valued perfect daughters with ivory smiles and diamond crowns. That was never me. I was the girl with ink-stained fingers and notebooks filled with questions no one wanted to hear. For years, I believed invisibility was my safest choice. I didn't know then that silence is not peace, it's just a cage built by someone else's fear. I'm not sure why I even came. Maybe some small, stubborn shard of hope inside me still believed that if I showed up, sat quietly dressed in the one black dress I owned, someone would look at me and say, "Elena, you're still part of this family." But no one looked at me. The oak-paneled conference room smelled like furniture polish and stale perfume. My father sat to my left in a steel gray suit, shoes shining so bright I could see my warped reflection in them. His hands rested on his knees, fingers steepled, a gesture of calm authority he'd perfected decades ago. My mother perched beside him, her pearl earrings swaying gently as she tilted her head towards my sister Sienna. She stroked Sienna's hair with absent affection, as if smoothing the silk of an expensive scarf. And Sienna sat glowing, golden hair and loose waves down her back, subtle makeup, highlighting her already perfect bone structure, soft pink lips curved in a poised, demure smile. Even now she managed to look like the star of a bridal magazine spread. Her dress was ivory lace, her heels were cream, her nails a pale ballet slipper pink, the very picture of purity and privilege. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, cleared his throat, bringing the room to order. His reading glasses slid down his nose as he flipped through thick legal documents, pages rustling like dry leaves. To Sienna Whitman, he began voice echoing off the polished walls. Mr. Samuel Whitman leaves a sum total of $20 million, the Kiowa Island beachfront estate, the family jewelry collection, and a 2% shareholding in Whitman Holdings. Sienna let out a soft, practiced gasp. Oh, Grandpa was so generous. Her voice trembled with perfect grace. My mother squeezed her hand, tears welling up in her eyes, mascara shimmering like oil slicks. My father nodded once approval, tightening his jaw. I watched them numb, as if witnessing a coronation I'd never been invited to. She turned slightly towards me, then her blue eyes wide with feigned innocence. "He always wanted what's best for us," she whispered, but I heard it for what it was. Us, meaning her, never me. Mr. Harris continued, flipping to the next page. "As for Elena Whitman," he said, barely pausing, "Mr. Whitman leaves no monetary inheritance. He expresses his hope that you will continue to pursue your academic endeavors independently, as he admired your self-sufficiency." My father exhaled sharply through his nose, a sound of irritation more than pity. "See, this is why you need to learn to stand on your own feet, Elena." My mother sighed almost theatrically, as if a heavy burden had been confirmed. "Your grandfather always believed struggle builds character." Sienna tilted her head, pity flickering across her porcelain features. "He just wanted you to grow," she offered softly, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I stared at the mahogany table in front of me, watching how the sunlight from the window traced lines across my folded hands. My nails were ragged. I had ink smudges on my thumb from grading papers on the train ride here. My hair was pulled back in a low bun too severe for my thin face, making my eyes look even more hollow. I wondered if they saw me at all, this ghost in a borrowed dress shoes scuffed from campus steps, carrying nothing but silent rage wrapped in resignation. Then Mr. Harris paused. "There is one more document." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew an envelope yellowed with time edges, softened my grandfather's blocky handwriting across the front. As he held it up, I saw my mother stiffen. My father's fingers twitched slightly. Sienna's perfect brow furrowed, her mask cracking for the first time. I felt it then, a shift in the room's gravity. Perhaps I was about to inherit something far more powerful. A secret they couldn't buy off, lie away, or bury under $20 million of curated affection. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just waited as Mr. Harris delicately opened the flap and pulled out its contents. Outside the window, magnolia petals drifted in the summer breeze, weightless and unbothered by human betrayal. Inside, silence swallowed the room whole, and for the first time in my life, I felt it. Their fear. I didn't drive straight there. I stopped halfway at a gas station off of 26, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and a faded Pepsi machine out front. I sat in my car for almost an hour, engine off, staring at the cracked asphalt shimmering in the July heat. My phone buzzed twice with academic group emails, but I didn't open them. For the first time in years, deadlines felt irrelevant. When I finally pulled onto the gravel road leading to the ranch, dusk had settled in. The sun melted behind the pine trees in bands of blood orange and violet, casting long shadows across the fields. I rolled down the window as I drove, letting warm summer air fill the car. It smelled like honeysuckle and dry grass scents I'd known since childhood scents that once meant safety. The ranch hadn't changed. That somehow made it worse. The old mailbox still leaned to the left, paint peeling off in jagged flakes. The split rail fence ran alongside the driveway, warped and moss-covered in places. As I parked, my headlights caught the edge of the porch, illuminating wind chimes that tinkled in the humid breeze, a sound that used to lull me to sleep on summer afternoons while sun tea brewed on the windowsill. Now it felt hollow, like an echo of something lost. I stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. The cicadas screamed in the trees overhead, relentless in their chorus. The magnolia trees still leaned slightly east heavy, with blooms like ivory moons against the darkening sky. I walked up the steps slowly, each board creaking under my weight, each creak whispering, "Stranger, stranger." I raised my hand to knock, hesitated. The white paint on the door had chipped away in long, curling strips. My breath caught in my throat. Part of me hoped no one would answer, that I could leave, drive away, pretend none of this was happening. But the door swung open before I even touched it. "So, you finally decided to show up." Her voice hadn't changed, sharp as cut glass, laced with a bitterness she didn't bother to hide. Ba Ruby stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her thin chest hair, pulled back into its usual severe bun, silver streaks glowing against the dim porch light. Her eyes, dark and unyielding, scanned me from head to toe. I tried to find something in her face, relief, warmth, confusion, anything, but there was nothing. Just that cold, heavy disappointment that had shadowed my entire childhood. "Grandma," I said, voice cracking on the word I hadn't spoken in too long. "What's going on?" She stepped aside without answering, letting me enter. The screen door slapped shut behind me. Inside, the air felt thicker, like the walls were holding their breath. The living room smelled faintly of lavender polish and old ashes from the fireplace. Everything looked the same: the floral armchairs, the oak coffee table with its chipped leg, the grandfather clock ticking steadily in the corner. Except me. I didn't belong here anymore. Maybe I never had. They told me you were too busy. Ba Ruby said quietly, her back to me as she moved into the kitchen, that you didn't want to be bothered, that you had a new life. I swallowed hard. My throat burned. That's not true. I tried to call. I came by in March. Sienna was here. She told me no one was home. Ba Ruby froze mid-step. Slowly, she turned, eyes narrowing. For a moment, she looked like a woman carved from stone. "We were here," she said flatly. "We were always here." Silence pressed down between us like the humid summer night outside. I felt a tremor ripple through my chest, a small crack in the dam I'd built inside myself. I stepped forward. "Grandma, please." I didn't know. I didn't know he was sick. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, her eyes eyes filled with something close to grief. She moved to the small cabinet beside the kitchen doorway, pulled out a worn leather notepad, and handed it to me. "This is the number he kept calling," she whispered. I took it with trembling hands, scanning the blocky, careful handwriting I knew so well, but the number on the page wasn't mine. Not even close. "Grandma," I said, voice small, breaking, "this isn't my number." "I've had the same one since college." She stared at the notepad for a long moment, lips quivering. "They told us you changed it, that you didn't want to be tracked down, that you were ashamed of us." "No," I breathed, leaning back against the wall as my knees buckled. "No, they lied to you. They cut me off from you on purpose." Her hands began to shake. She turned away, pressing her fingers to her lips. I saw her shoulders tremble, saw the truth settle heavy into her bones. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "He called for you, Elena, every day, on his deathbed. He asked for you." My vision blurred as tears spilled hot and fast down my cheeks. I pressed my fist to my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. The world tilted beneath me. Everything I tried to build to keep myself sane, the rational explanations, the justifications, the excuses shattered like glass underfoot. I didn't know. I didn't know he was even sick until it was too late. And in that moment, staring at the chipped white paint, the peeling linoleum floor, the woman who raised my mother and watched her raise me into nothing, I felt something sharp and unbreakable solidify inside my chest. They thought they could erase me, but ghosts have a way of coming back, and I wasn't done haunting them yet. I don't know how long we stood there, me pressed against the faded floral wallpaper, Ba Ruby clutching the edge of the countertop like the weight of her own bones was too much to bear. The clock on the mantel ticked louder with each second, counting down to something neither of us could name. Finally, she straightened, wiped her eyes roughly with the back of her hand, and moved past me into the living room. Her movements were stiff, mechanical, as if she were afraid her grief might spill out if she loosened her grip for even a moment. "Sit down," she ordered. I obeyed without a word, sinking into the old armchair opposite hers. The cushions sagged under me, smelling faintly of cedar and lavender polish. She reached for a box beneath the coffee table, pulling it onto her lap with trembling hands. "I didn't want to believe them," she whispered almost to herself. "Your mother, Sienna. They told me you wanted nothing to do with us, that you said this place was a graveyard for wasted potential." My chest constricted. "I never said that." She shook her head as if trying to clear away cobwebs of lies spun so expertly she'd started believing them herself. Her fingers fumbled with the metal latch on the box, finally clicking it open. Inside, neatly stacked, were dozens of unopened letters. My letters. The ones I'd mailed for years, birthday cards, postcards from research conferences, scribbled notes with pressed flowers tucked inside. "They told me you were too busy to visit," she said, voice cracking. "But you wrote. All these years you wrote." I reached forward with shaking hands, lifting the top letter. My handwriting stared back at me in neat black ink. "To Grandma from Elena. Miss you. Love you." Tears blurred my vision. "Why didn't you open them?" I whispered. She looked at me, then eyes raw and red. "Because your mother said she said you sent them to prove how important you were. That it was cruel to read your words when you had no intention of coming back." I felt something rupture inside my chest, a silent scream tearing through every part of me. The room spun slightly. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Grandma, they lied to you. They kept us apart. But I didn't finish. Because just then the front door creaked open. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. For a moment, I thought it was my parents arriving early for whatever reckoning Ba Ruby had planned. But when I turned, the figure that stepped into the room made every cell in my body go cold. Sienna stood there, framed by the fading sunset, her ivory coat, pristine hair twisted into an elegant chignon. But there was nothing soft about her eyes. Ruby's face went slack with shock. How did you? I had your phone tapped, Sienna said simply, shrugging off her coat and draping it over a chair. She walked towards me, heels silent, on the worn rug like a predator stalking prey. You really should be more careful about your little revenge plots. My blood turned to ice. You tapped Grandma's phone. Sienna smiled, a slow, deliberate curling of lips that never reached her eyes. Oh, Elena, still so naive. Do you really think I'd let you two conspire against everything I've worked for? She leaned down until her face was inches from mine. I smelled her perfume, white jasmine, and something sharper, metallic like blood and coins. You're not going to ruin this for me, she whispered. You can keep your pathetic letters, your dusty lab dreams. But don't you dare think you can take what's mine. Her hand darted out suddenly, grabbing my wrist so hard my bones ached. He chose me, she hissed. No letter changes that. Get out, Ba Ruby's voice cut through the room like an axe. Her hands trembled, but her gaze was steel. You get out of my house, Sienna. Sienna didn't move for a long moment. Then she released my wrist, straightened her spine, smoothed invisible wrinkles from her blouse, and turned to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at me. Her eyes glittered with a venomous triumph. You always were the ghost in this family, Elena, she said softly. Don't forget it. Then she was gone, her perfume lingering long after the front door slammed shut. The silence that followed was suffocating. My pulse roared in my ears like a storm surge against cliffs. I felt the bruises forming beneath my skin where her fingers had pressed too hard. I felt every lie tightening around my chest like a vice. But beneath the fear, beneath the grief and rage, something else flickered to life, small, sharp, unyielding. They built this life on lies. They built it on erasing me. Now I thought, staring at the stack of unopened letters, feeling the pulse of old secrets pressing against the thin paper. Let's see what happens when the ghost decides to haunt them back to hell. For a long time after Sienna left, neither of us spoke. Mrs. Ruby sat in the armchair, her elbows on her knees, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook, once just a tremor, like the last tremor of a fault line before it sank into silence. I sat across from her, holding my wrist where Sienna's fingers had imprinted crescent moons into my skin. The fading sunlight filtered through the lace curtains in long yellow streaks, illuminating the dust motes that hung in the thick silent air. Finally, she raised her head. Her eyes were red, but they burned with something fierce beneath the grief. She wiped her cheeks, roughly straightened her thin shoulders, and stood. I've let this go on long enough, she said, her voice low and shaky with suppressed rage. She moved across the room with astonishing speed, pulling the old rotary phone from its cradle on the kitchen wall. Its coiled cord stretched taut as she set it down on the counter. I watched her fingers dial each number carefully, the clicks echoing like gunshots in the small kitchen. I hadn't heard that phone in years. I'd forgotten the sound of the numbers turning on its rusty dial, the final thump as each number fell into place. Who are you calling? I asked, though my voice was barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. Her eyes remained fixed on the phone, unblinking, as if she feared the resolve in her bones might shatter if she looked away. Finally, the line clicked. She took a sharp breath, then spoke, her voice as sharp as a knife. Betty. Yes, it's Ruby. There was a pause. I could hear my mother's confused voice on the other end of the line. Don't talk. Listen carefully. Another pause, longer this time. I imagined my mother sitting at the kitchen island, her manicured fingernails tapping her wine glass, her confusion turning to frustration. You, Marcus, and Sienna, come here. 1 hour. I heard a faint protest coming from the receiver, my mother's tone rising in that controlling, cold way she reserved for her staff and family when things didn't go according to her plan. No, Mrs. Ruby interrupted her. Her voice dropped an octave, cold and final. This can't wait. She stood perfectly still, her hand resting lightly on the receiver as if to anchor herself to reality. Then she turned back to face me. "The lawyer is here too," she said. "Mr. Harris." My throat was dry with disuse. "Why?" "Because Walter left instructions," she said, her eyes locking with mine with a force that made me shiver. "He wanted certain documents read in front of everyone. No exceptions." I swallowed, my heart pounding in my chest. "What kind of documents?" She shook her head once, briefly and firmly. "You'll see." She walked past me into the living room, her steps deliberate and slow. I heard her moving, adjusting the picture frame on the mantelpiece, wiping down the table. Ready, ready. Like a general preparing a battlefield before going into battle. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the old phone on the wall. Its faded ivory case was cracked at one corner, a thin line of rust trailing from the screws. I remember when I was 5, tracing those cracks with my fingers, while Grandpa Samuel called seed suppliers at dawn, his voice low and steady as the sun rose over the magnolias outside. I wonder what he would say if he were here now. Probably nothing. He just looked at me with those sharp brown eyes, the ones I saw in my own reflection, and nodded. As if to say, "You know what to do." My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it on my fingertips. Outside, the cicadas sang their evening chorus. The wind picked up, shaking the porch bells into an uncoordinated frenzy. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me, breathing in the storm that was brewing down the road. They thought they could erase me with distance and silence, but distance only sharpened my voice. The silence only made my resolve stronger. And tonight, for the first time, they would hear it. All of it. The hour passed slowly, each minute thick with anticipation. I paced the kitchen floor, my boots thudding softly against the faded linoleum. In the living room, Ba Ruby moved with quiet efficiency, arranging cups on the coffee table, setting out the good china she hadn't used since Grandpa Samuel's funeral. The porcelain rattled faintly against the tray as her thin hands worked, but her face remained impassive, carved from iron and grief. When the grandfather clock struck 7, headlights swept across the living room curtains. I felt my chest tighten, my breath catching in my throat. The crunch of gravel under tires was followed by the slam of car doors, sharp and final in the humid evening air. Ba Ruby didn't flinch. She set the last cup down and straightened her shoulders squared, chin lifted. "Stay in here," she said, without looking at me. "I'll call you when it's time." I nodded, sinking onto one of the kitchen chairs, my hands trembling in my lap. From where I sat, I could hear everything. The old wooden floors carried voices like secrets. The front door opened with a drawn-out creak. My mother's voice rang out, sweetened with forced concern. "What is all this about?" We were in the middle of dinner. I imagined her standing there in a tailored cream blouse, pearls at her throat, hair set in perfect waves. I could hear the faint clink of her bracelets as she fussed with her purse strap. Then my father's voice, calm and cool. "I thought we agreed. This was all settled, Ruby. There's nothing else to discuss." And finally, Sienna. Her sigh floated through the air like poisoned honey. "Seriously, Grandma, this couldn't wait until after colder than I'd ever heard it. "Sit down, all of you. Mr. Harris is on his way. He'll be reading Samuel's final instructions." The pause that followed was long and loaded. What final instructions, my father asked, irritation flickering beneath his polished tone. "Dad didn't leave anything else," Sienna added sharply. "I was there for the reading." "This is ridiculous." I pictured her rolling her eyes, lips pursed in disdain, her diamond earrings catching the soft lamplight. My mother would be fussing with her rings, spinning them around her fingers the way she always did when nervous. door creaked open, followed by the familiar low voice of Mr. Harris. "This won't take long." He said his words clipped and professional, but it must be done properly. From the kitchen, I felt the temperature in the room drop. The wood beneath my feet seemed to hum with tension. My pulse roared in my ears. Then came Ba Ruby's voice, steady and strong. "Elena, come in now." For a moment, I couldn't move. My knees felt locked in place, my fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles burned white. But then I stood, taking one slow, deliberate breath after another, and walked down the short hallway towards the living room. As I stepped through the doorway, 3 heads turned towards me in unison. My mother's painted smile froze on her lips, her eyes going wide with something between shock and disgust. My father's jaw clenched, the vein in his temple twitching. As he adjusted his tie, a nervous tick, he thought no one noticed. And Sienna's face went pale, her mouth dropping open slightly, like someone had ripped away her script mid-performance. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air felt charged, crackling with invisible electricity, every molecule vibrating with the knowledge that whatever peace they thought they had secured was about to be shattered. I kept my back straight, shoulders squared. If they expected me to cower, they would leave this house disappointed. Ba Ruby gestured to the empty armchair across from them. "Sit down, Elena," she said quietly. "It's time we finished what Samuel started." And as I lowered myself into the chair, folding my trembling hands in my lap, I felt it again, that flicker of something bright and indestructible sparking in my chest. They had spent years building this stage, scripting every scene to cast me as invisible. But tonight, for the first time, I wasn't the ghost. I was the storm. Mr. Harris set his leather briefcase down on the coffee table with a muted thud. He moved unhurriedly, his movements precise, almost ritualistic, as he unclasped the brass latches and lifted the top open. Papers rustled softly in the silent room. The only other sound was the tick, tick, tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, each second punctuating the tightening air like a metronome counting down to detonation. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Harris said, his voice even and unreadable. He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering briefly on me before returning to his files. "As you know, Mr. Samuel Whitman's will was read 2 weeks ago. However, he left additional documents with strict instructions that they be presented only when the entire immediate family was gathered." Sienna shifted in her seat, her impatience barely contained. "This is absurd," she snapped. "We've already settled everything. Grandpa left me." Her voice faltered for half a second before she regained her composure. "He left me what he wanted to leave me." Mr. Harris didn't respond. He simply withdrew a thick manila envelope sealed with dark red wax. Even from across the room, I recognized my grandfather's seal pressed into it, a honeybee inside a hexagon, his lifelong emblem. His quiet rebellion against a family obsessed with lions and crowns. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees, trying to maintain his air of calm authority. "Let's just get this over with." Mr. Harris broke the wax seal with deliberate care. He withdrew several pages stapled neatly together, and at the very top was my grandfather's broad, confident handwriting. He cleared his throat and began to read. "To my wife, Ruby Whitman," he began. Ba Ruby sat unmoving, her lined face carved from stone eyes fixed on the lawyer. "I leave our family ranch, the house, and sufficient funds for your comfort and care. You know where to find the rest." No one spoke. Mr. Harris turned the page. "To my granddaughter, Elena Whitman." I felt the air in the room tighten like a noose. My pulse roared in my ears, but outwardly I sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. "I leave the Whitman Research Annex located at 317 Laurel Creek Road, Charleston, including all laboratory equipment funding accounts, active research patents, and intellectual property currently filed under Whitman Innovation." There was a sharp intake of breath, not mine. My mother's eyes darted to Sienna. My father's jaw twitched. Sienna went rigid, her knuckles whitening where they gripped the arm of her chair. Mr. Harris continued unbothered. And finally, the remainder of my estate financial holding stocks and retirement funds shall be divided equally between my two granddaughters, Elena and Sienna Whitman. Silence fell like a hammer. Then came the explosion. What Sienna's voice cracked shrill and raw. She surged to her feet so violently her chair skidded back and slammed against the wall. That's impossible. He gave me everything. You told me. She spun towards our parents' eyes blazing with betrayal. You said if I kept visiting him, if I smiled and played nice, that everything would be mine. My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother stared down at her lap, twisting her wedding ring round and round her finger like she could spin away from this moment if she turned it fast enough. I sat silent, hands folded in my lap. I didn't trust my voice not to shatter if I tried to speak. But inside, something deep and long buried uncurled and rose, filling my lungs with air that felt painfully, beautifully sharp. There is more, Mr. Harris said, raising his hand to silence Sienna's ragged breathing. Mr. Whitman left a personal letter for Elena to be read aloud in this room. Ba Ruby reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out a folded piece of thick stationery, handing it to the lawyer with hands that trembled only slightly. He wrote it the week before he died, she said softly. He made me promise. Mr. Harris unfolded the letter carefully. For a moment, his eyes scanned the first lines, and something flickered in his expression, a shadow of grief, perhaps. Then he began to read. To my dearest Elena, he read, his voice steady, but the words vibrating through the air like a bell tolling for the dead and the living alike. If this is being read, then I am no longer by your side, but my belief in you remains stronger than ever. The room faded around me. All I heard were his words. You were always the quiet one, the observer, the thinker, the one who asked why when others didn't care to. You built your own truth in a family that never learned to honor yours. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't look away. I wanted them to hear, all of it. You were never a mistake, Mr. Harris read on. You were the legacy I was proudest of. I felt something inside me loosen something that had been clenched tight for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without pain. You deserve celebration, Elena, not invisibility. And while I can't undo the damage, I can give you something that is entirely yours. A place to build freely without apology, without their shadows. Mr. Harris folded the letter slowly, laying it gently on the table. Silence flooded the room. My mother's mascara streaked faintly under her eyes. My father stared at the floor, unmoving. Sienna sank back into her chair, her eyes wild and lost. I inhaled shakily, feeling my chest expand with something dangerously close to hope. They had spent their lives making me small, and now, with a few quiet words from beyond the grave, he had made me infinite. Mr. Harris's hand trembled slightly as he unfolded the next page. The parchment crackled in the hush of the living room, the only other sound the tick of the grandfather clock each second, striking like a drumbeat in my chest. He cleared his throat and continued reading. I saw how you clutched that little notebook when you were 7, tracking how long it took raindrops to fill a glass. I saw how your face lit up when you discovered patterns while everyone else only saw distractions. A faint sob slipped from my mother's throat. I didn't look at her. I saw how your joy dimmed when your mother brushed you off, the way your father changed the subject every time you shared something you were proud of. My hands trembled in my lap. I forced them to still. The words weren't daggers. They were salve. They burned, yes, but only because they cleaned wounds I'd left to fester for years. Vanessa sparkled in ways they understood, he wrote, using Sienna's real name, the name she'd cast off like an old coat when she turned 18. But you, Elena, you glowed in ways they could never translate. And instead of learning your language, they shut you out. I heard Sienna shift in her seat, the rustle of her silk blouse loud in the silence. I didn't turn to her. I didn't need to see her face to know what it held: resentment, confusion, fear. She had always been terrified of truths she couldn't rewrite. I don't blame her entirely. Grandpa's letter continued. She played the part they handed her, but you wrote your own role. And that, my girl, takes courage. A tear rolled down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I wanted them to see. I wanted them to know these tears weren't weakness. They were proof that despite everything I still felt. I remember the day you won your first science fair and asked me to hide the trophy. You said, maybe if I don't show it, they'll stop looking at me like I'm someone else's child. My breath caught painfully in my chest. I had forgotten saying that. Or maybe I'd forced myself to forget. I heard a faint shuddering exhale from my father's side of the room. Guilt or annoyance, I couldn't tell. It didn't matter. You deserved celebration, Elena. Not invisibility. Mr. Harris paused, his eyes scanning the final lines. The air in the room seemed to hum alive with something electric and unspoken. While I cannot undo what they stole from you, I can give you this: a place that is yours alone, a place to build freely without apology, without their shadows. The lawyer folded the letter with deliberate care, setting it on the table in front of me. For a long moment, no one moved. The clock ticked on, indifferent to human heartbreak. Finally, I drew in a ragged breath and looked up, meeting my mother's gaze. Her mascara had smeared, shadowing her eyes like bruises. My father wouldn't look at me. Sienna sat rigid, her lips pressed into a thin white line. I let the silence stretch, let them sit in it, uncomfortable and raw. Then I spoke, my voice quiet but steady. Grandpa saw me, I said, even when none of you did. No one answered. No one could. In that moment, with my grandfather's words still ringing in the hollow spaces of my chest, I understood something I'd never let myself believe before. They hadn't broken me. They'd only built walls around me, hoping I'd never learn to climb them. But Grandpa had left me a ladder, and I intended to use it. The silence after Mr. Harris finished reading was not empty. It was dense, vibrating with unspoken truths, with memories we each tried to bury under years of careful lies. My mother cleared her throat first. Her fingers twisted her wedding ring again and again, the metal flashing dully under the chandelier's light. Elena, she began, her voice trembling at the edges. This isn't the time to... No, I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. It's the only time. She flinched. My father shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking to me and away as though I were a bright light he couldn't bear to look at directly. Sienna sat rigid, her chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. All my life, I continued, my voice cracking but unbroken. All I ever got from either of you was, "Why can't you just be more like your sister?" I turned to Sienna then, and her eyes widened, reflecting the brittle chandelier light. "And from you?" I said softly. "Every time I tried to be proud of something, you turned it into a threat." "Oh, come on," she spat, her voice trembling. "You always made yourself the victim. I worked for what I got." I let out a hollow laugh. "You mean you visited Grandpa when it was convenient, smiled when you were told to, said the right things because you thought it would pay off." Her expression hardened into something cruel and small. "And what about you?" she snapped. "You think you're so pure you disappeared for years." "No," I said, leaning forward, my words slicing through the thick air. "I was erased. You told Grandma I didn't want to see her. You gave Grandpa a fake number so I'd never get his calls. That's not distance, Sienna. That's obliteration." My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping the wood floor. "Enough, Elena. You're twisting everything. This family has been through. This family," Ba Ruby's voice cut in sharply. again, looking suddenly old in his tailored suit. "Look, Elena got her education, her lab camps, her travel." "That wasn't free, no." I whispered, my voice thick with grief and fury. "But you didn't pay for any of it." "Grandpa did. Every cent, every scholarship he found, every flight he booked. You didn't even know where I went half the time." My voice cracked open, raw and trembling. "You made me feel like a burden." He made me feel seen. Sienna stood then, her chair tipping slightly behind her. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I was told I'd get everything. I was the one who stayed. I was the good daughter." "No," I said softly, tears sliding down my cheeks, unchecked. "You were the performer, the chosen. I was the hidden one. But Grandpa didn't forget me. And now you don't get to erase me anymore." Her face twisted in rage. "Why should you get anything?" She spat. "Just because you're a sad little genius with a lab coat?" I smiled, then small and weary. "No, I get something because I earned his love honestly. That's the one thing you never understood, Sienna. Love isn't a performance." The room fell silent. Outside, the wind rattled the magnolia branches against the window, a soft percussion to the final unraveling of everything they'd built. Ba Ruby moved to the center of the room, her back straight, her eyes fierce. She looked directly at my parents, then at Sienna. "Leave," she said quietly. My mother gasped, "Mother, out." She repeated, her voice steel wrapped in velvet, "Now." No one moved at first. Then Sienna grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. My father followed, silent and defeated. My mother lingered for a moment, her eyes glassy with tears she refused to shed, before turning away and disappearing down the hallway. The front door closed behind them with a soft click. No slamming, no yelling, just finality. For a moment I stayed frozen, staring at the empty chairs, listening to the sudden profound silence that filled the room like a benediction. "They'll come back," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "They always do." "Maybe," Ba Ruby said, her eyes meeting mine across the wreckage of teacups and shattered illusions. "But this time, we don't have to let them in." I closed my eyes, then feeling the words settle deep into my bones like roots breaking through dry earth. For the first time in my life, I felt it. I was no longer begging for a place in their world. I was finally standing in my own. That night, I stayed in my old room for the first time in years. The mattress was too soft, sinking under my weight, like it couldn't bear to hold me. The wallpaper had faded from cream to a weary yellow curling at the edges near the window. But the glow-in-the-dark stars still clung to the ceiling, tiny constellations Grandpa Samuel had helped me stick up when I was 9. I'd made him arrange them in scientifically accurate formations. He hadn't even questioned it. He'd just smiled and said, "Of course, Professor." I lay there staring at those plastic stars, feeling 10 years old and 100 all at once. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt reclaimed. Mine again in a way it had never been before. When dawn came pale and silent, I brewed coffee for Ba Ruby and me. She sat at the kitchen table in her quilted robe, hair pinned back, eyes rimmed with fatigue, but alive with something fierce and unbroken. So she asked, voice rasping lightly, "What now?" I stared into my mug, watching wisps of steam curl up and disappear into the dim morning light. For a moment, words eluded me, but then they came quiet and certain. "I think I go see it," I said. "The annex, the lab." She nodded, a small smile touching the corner of her mouth. "He'd like that." I left after breakfast, driving out past the magnolia trees down Laurel Creek Road, gravel rattling beneath my tires. The sun rose slowly, turning the sky a gentle peach that burned into gold as I pulled into the long dirt drive. At first glance, the annex didn't look like a laboratory at all. It looked like an old converted barn, wide beams weathered to silvery gray, a rusted tin roof, double doors that belonged on a horse stable. But as I stepped inside, my breath caught in my throat. Glass panels lined the east wall, flooding the space with morning light. Stainless steel tables stood neatly arranged, each topped with pristine lab equipment, microscopes, centrifuges, data tablets, and a 3D printer still wrapped in plastic. Shelves held rows of unopened boxes labeled with my name. In the center of the room was a wide oak workbench. Sitting atop it was my childhood notebook. I walked over on unsteady legs and picked it up. The cover was scuffed, the pages dog-eared, filled with messy diagrams of honeybee communication systems and clumsy hypotheses scrawled in pencil. I hadn't seen it since college. I thought I'd lost it forever. But he had kept it. All these years he'd kept it safe. A sob rose in my chest, silent and clean, leaving behind only a deep, aching clarity. He hadn't just built me a lab. He'd built me a home for my mind. I spent the next few weeks moving into the annex full-time. I recruited 2 graduate students, Tara and Micah, friends from my university program who believed, like I did, that science could still be human. We started small, a local grant for micro-irrigation research, then a partnership with a regional farming co-op to test sustainable crop rotations. We burned equipment. We cried over rejected proposals. We stayed up until dawn modeling broken data sets. And yet every morning we came back. Because here in these sunlit walls that smelled of cedar and possibility, there was no need to explain myself. No need to dim my intensity or soften my mind to fit into someone else's script. Here for the first time I could build without permission. Here I could be the girl who asked why and the woman who searched for answers. Here I wasn't invisible. I was infinite. 3 years passed before I saw her again. In that time, the annex grew from a single converted barn into a campus. 2 greenhouses, 3 small labs, and acres of trial fields blooming with drought-resistant crops that once existed only in my notebooks. We partnered with local schools to launch the Little Scientist Initiative, teaching rural kids to see wonder in things their textbooks ignored. Each morning I woke before dawn and drove to the annex in the cool blue dark, feeling a sense of purpose so sharp it hurt. And Sienna, I heard her name sometimes, in whispers, in news feeds. At first she tried to contest the will, but Grandpa's instructions were ironclad. Then came the tabloid stories, society events she attended alone, hair perfectly styled, smile brittle under the flashbulbs. Eventually, the mentions of her dried up altogether, replaced by rumors, debt vanished, brand deals, a fiancé who left quietly in the middle of the night. No one said it outright, but everyone knew. Her kingdom had crumbled the day Grandpa exposed its foundation as a lie. The email came on a Monday morning. Subject line, request for visit. Sender Vanessa Sienna Whitman. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying with a single word, come. When she arrived, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the ivory dresses, the delicate heels, the hair curled into golden waves. She wore dark jeans and a navy coat, 2 sizes too big sleeves frayed at the cuffs. Her face was bare shadows blooming under her eyes, and she walked like someone afraid to take up space. She paused at the reception desk where Grandpa's portrait hung above the sign reading Whitman Innovation Annex. Her gaze lingered on his smiling face. When she turned to me, her eyes were glassy but dry. He always knew who you were, she said softly. Even when I didn't, especially when I didn't. I didn't answer. I just nodded and gestured for her to follow. We walked the annex halls in silence. She trailed her fingers lightly along the walls, as if grounding herself in something real for the first time in years. In the greenhouse wing, she stopped beside a cluster of tomato vines heavy with bright red fruit. Her hand hovered over a ripening cherry tomato before falling to her side. After the will reading, she whispered, her voice frayed and small. I lost everything. Sponsors, contracts, friends who were only friends because they thought I was someone powerful. She laughed bitterly, a hollow, broken sound. For a while, I didn't leave my apartment. I drank too much, slept too little, looked in the mirror and didn't see anything. I stayed silent, letting her words fill the humid greenhouse air. She turned to face me, then eyes shining with unshed tears. You know, from the moment we were kids, everyone always told me I was special, that I was the pretty one, the bright one, the one who would make the family proud. Her voice shook. But here I am, standing in this place you built with your own hands and mind, and I'm not even a shadow of you. Sienna, I began, but she shook her head violently. No, let me say it. She drew in a ragged breath. From the start, you terrified me. Because I knew no matter how many crowns they put on my head, no matter how many times they clapped when I performed, none of it was real. But you were real. Your mind, your questions, your dreams. And I hated you for it. Because I knew I could never be anything but what they wanted me to be. Her tears finally spilled over, sliding silently down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. I looked at her, then truly looked at her. For the first time, I didn't see the girl who stole my parents' love, the woman who erased my name from letters meant for me. I saw someone raised in a cage of velvet and gold who never learned how to breathe outside it. She swallowed hard, wiping her nose with the back of her hand like a child. I don't expect you to forgive me, she whispered. I just wanted to see what it looked like. A life that's real. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The greenhouse buzzed with life bees flitting between blossoms, the irrigation system hissing softly in its cycle. Finally, I nodded. You're here now? I said quietly. That's something. She let out a shuddering exhale, half relief, half grief. And in that moment, I realized she would never be my sister in the way people meant it. But maybe here in this sunlit annex Grandpa built for truth, we could begin again. Not as sisters bound by blood and rivalry, but as two women learning finally how to stand in their own light. 6 years have passed since the will reading, 6 years since the front door of Ba Ruby's house closed behind my parents and Sienna, their footsteps echoing down the porch like the end of a performance no one clapped for. I haven't spoken to my parents since. Sometimes their names pop up in emails. I don't open charity press releases, financial articles about their early retirement to Florida. I don't hate them, but I don't miss them either. What I think about instead is the work. The annex has grown beyond anything I could have imagined in that first quiet dawn. What started as a single converted barn is now a sprawling research campus, 4 labs, 3 glass greenhouses glowing like lanterns at night. Over 60 acres of trial fields where golden wheat sways under Carolina sunsets, and drought-resistant soybeans bloom creamy white despite the dry winds. We've developed seed varieties that feed thousands in southern counties where traditional crops fail under heat waves. We've partnered with universities in Kenya and Brazil to share regenerative agriculture findings. And last month, I stood on a stage in San Francisco accepting a national grant for climate innovation wearing a navy blue suit and Grandpa's pocket watch tucked inside the breast pocket. The watch Grandma gave me last year, initials barely faded with a tiny photo tucked in the lid, me at 10 years old beaming beside my honeybee communication project. He carried it every day, she told me. Now it sits on my desk at the annex right where morning light catches it and scatters small, bright circles across my research notes. Some days when an experiment fails, or when a child from the Little Scientist Initiative wins a scholarship, I touch the watch gently. I don't speak out loud, but I know he hears. Because he never let me disappear? Not really. And now I understand why. Legacy isn't a monument. It isn't gold plaques or engraved gates bearing your family's name. Legacy is a map, one built from choices and kindness and tiny anchors left behind for someone to follow when the world tries to erase them. These days, Ba Ruby lives in a small apartment connected to my house in town. Her hair is thinner, Her step slower, her memory sometimes frayed at the edges. But when it counts, she's sharper than anyone I know. Every morning we drink coffee together in the sunroom. She tells me stories about Grandpa I've never heard before, how he once planted a tree just to propose to her, how he believed soil could remember kindness, how he always knew I would come back. And maybe he was right. Maybe I had to leave to understand what returning truly meant. Some evenings, when the annex grows quiet and the last grad student's footsteps fade down the hall, I walk out to the old wooden bench Grandpa built at the edge of the trial fields. From there, I can see the stars, real ones, glittering cold and bright against the endless dark. But I still think of those glow-in-the-dark stars we stuck on my ceiling when I was 9. I remember how I insisted they formed scientifically accurate constellations, and how he hadn't laughed or brushed me off. He just nodded and said, "Of course, Professor." I think of that girl often, the one with scraped knees and pencil-smudged hands, the one who asked why even when no one cared to answer, the one who refused to be quiet. And on nights like this, when the wind moves through the magnolia trees just right, I swear I hear his voice in the rustling leaves. Write the things they don't understand. One day the world will, and now finally it does. Sometimes I stand in the annex lobby at dawn, long before students arrive, before the labs flicker to life with fluorescent glow. The early light filters through the east glass panels in soft bands, illuminating Grandpa's portrait above the reception desk. He's smiling in it, that quiet, knowing smile. The one that always made me feel like my mind wasn't too much, just bigger than the rooms they tried to contain it in. This morning I stand there again, cradling a steaming mug of dark roast, feeling the hum of the building around me. A place built first from his dreams, then from mine. I think about how far we've come. We've launched youth science programs in 6 counties, each child given a notebook just like mine, stamped inside the cover with Grandpa's words, "Write the things they don't understand. One day the world will." Our field trials have expanded into reforestation and micro-irrigation projects. Last week, a team from Nairobi arrived to study our hybrid drought-tolerant legumes. Next month, we'll partner with a local indigenous community to restore native medicinal plants to abandoned farmland. Every day here feels like a reclamation of soil, of knowledge, of purpose. And me, I no longer wake up feeling the ache of absence. That longing for a family who never saw me, never tried to understand the glow in my chest that was never theirs to own. I still hear from Sienna sometimes. Twice a year, she volunteers for the Little Scientist Initiative, teaching students how to speak with confidence during presentations. They call her Coach V. She never apologized directly, but each morning she shows up with fresh lesson plans, her hair pulled back, simply her eyes calm. For her, that is apology enough. And maybe after everything, it's all that truly matters. My parents remain ghosts in old news articles and untouched emails, and I've realized I don't need to exorcise them. I've outgrown the haunted rooms they tried to trap me in. These days, after the sun dips below the magnolia trees, I walk down to the far end of the annex fields. Beyond the irrigation beds and student gardens, there is a small wooden bench Grandpa built with his own hands. From there, the horizon unfolds like a promise. I sit there in the lavender twilight, feeling the hum of cicadas rise around me. Above the stars prick through the velvet dark one by one, each burning silently across the universe's vast indifference. They remind me of the glow-in-the-dark constellations on my childhood ceiling, only now I see them for what they truly are. Not plastic cutouts or quiet comforts, but blazing bodies of light holding their place in the world with quiet certainty. In those moments, I think of that girl, the one who refused to be quiet, who asked why when no one listened, the one he believed in. And finally, I understand love was never theirs to withhold. Validation was never theirs to give. I was never invisible. I was infinite, and I always had been. The wind moves softly through the magnolia branches, rustling the leaves in gentle applause. I close my eyes, feeling tears gather but not fall, feeling the quiet press of peace against my skin like dawn. I hear him then, his voice carried in the hush of the night, write the things they don't understand. One day the world will, and now finally it does. This is a story about the children made invisible in their own families, about a girl who grew up learning to shrink herself into silence so she wouldn't become a burden. But along the way, she discovers something powerful. True worth does not come from others' validation. Love is not a prize awarded to the best performer. Legacy is not a monument to be admired from afar. It is a map left behind so someone lost can find their way home again. Elena never needed to become anyone else. She only needed to become herself and use that voice to build paths for other quiet children who were taught their curiosity was too loud. Have you ever felt you had to perform to be loved? Has anyone ever made you believe silence was the only way to exist? If you could rewrite the map of your life today, where would you begin? This story is for anyone who was ever told they were too different, too intense, too much to remind you you are not invisible. You are light. And even if they don't understand you, now one day, the world will.